It's been years, but the memory still clings to me like smoke, thick and inescapable. I'd been studying folklore, researching tales of hauntings and hidden rituals lost in the folds of ancient forests, when Professor Blackwood invited me on an expedition. He was respected, enigmatic even, and when he extended the invitation, I didn't hesitate. Little did I know that my curiosity was leading me somewhere I'd never truly escape. The forest felt alive as we entered, its thick canopy blocking out the last traces of sunlight, swallowing us whole. Shadows clung to the trees like dark lace, and the air was damp, thick, pressing down on us, heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and something else, something primal and unsettling. I remember the professor leading the way, his gait brisk and confident as he carried his worn journal filled with decades of research, its leather cover slick with a strange, oily residue. "There's a place ahead," he said cryptically, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. His voice, usually calm and measured, held a hint of manic excitement. As the forest deepened, the oppressive silence was broken only by the crunch of leaves under our boots and the occasional snap of a twig. The trees seemed to lean in, their gnarled branches like skeletal fingers reaching out, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. Then, from the suffocating gloom, a figure emerged from the trees, her form like something conjured from an old myth, a nymph twisted into something darker, more sinister. She was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, a presence that drew you in but warned you to stay away. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, her hair a cascade of raven black that seemed to drink in the little light that filtered through the canopy. Her eyes, however, were the most striking feature, pools of liquid obsidian that seemed to hold ancient secrets, 1,000 untold stories. The professor greeted her as if he'd known her all his life, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper as he called her name. I can still hear it echoing in my mind. "The whore," he said, almost with a twisted reverence, a possessive hunger in his tone that made my skin crawl. At first, she barely acknowledged me, her gaze fixed on the professor with an intensity that left me cold. There was an energy in the air, something dark, magnetic, that bound them together in a way I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones, a raw, primal connection that whispered of forbidden desires and ancient pacts. She led us to a small clearing, a natural circle surrounded by tall, silent trees that seemed to watch, their branches like claws reaching down, their bark scarred with symbols I couldn't decipher. As she whispered to him in a language I couldn't understand, a guttural melody that vibrated in the depths of my being, the professor seemed entranced, captivated in a way I'd never seen. His eyes glazed over, his body swaying slightly, as if he were being pulled into a hypnotic trance. His normally controlled demeanor was shattered, replaced by a look of desperate longing that bordered on obsession. Her voice, a low, seductive purr, seemed to weave its way into his very soul, and I felt a surge of jealousy, a visceral reaction to the way she held him captive with her gaze and her words. But as the minutes wore on, she finally looked at me. Her eyes locked with mine, and I felt as though she could see straight into the darkest corners of my mind, bringing a chill that seeped into my skin, a chilling awareness of my own deepest desires and hidden fears. Her smile wasn't warm. It was hollow, a hint of cruelty in the curve of her lips, a predatory smirk that promised pain and pleasure in equal measure. "You came looking for something, didn't you?" she asked softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Her words wrapped around me, lingering in the air, making it hard to breathe, a venomous caress that stole the air from my lungs. I tried to answer, but the forest seemed to close in around me. I wanted to leave, but the professor remained transfixed, his body trembling with a suppressed need, his eyes locked onto hers as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. Shadows twisted at the edges of my vision, and I realized that we were no longer alone. Faint whispers rose from the trees, voices barely audible but laden with a potent sexuality that filled me with a strange mix of fear and fascination. Shapes danced just beyond the edge of the clearing, ethereal forms that shimmered and writhed in the darkness, their movements suggestive and disturbing. The woman laughed softly, almost mocking, a sound like the rustling of dry leaves underfoot, her fingers tracing the professor's arm as he stood frozen, his body responding to her touch in a way that was both disturbing and alluring. Her touch sent a shiver down his spine, a wave of longing that washed over him, his body reacting involuntarily. Her fingers moved lower, tracing the lines of his chest, her nails digging into his skin, leaving delicate crescent-shaped marks that bled a dark crimson. He moaned softly, a sound of mingled pleasure and pain, his eyes fluttering closed as if surrendering to the intoxicating sensation. Then, as if sensing my unease, she turned her attention fully on me. Her smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too unnatural, fangs that hinted at a darker nature, a predator's hunger for flesh. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing," she whispered, her voice laced with a seductive threat. "Some paths should remain unwalked." The forest seemed to close in tighter, and every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run as fast as my legs could carry me. I felt a strange pull towards her, a morbid curiosity that battled with my primal fear. Her eyes, those pools of obsidian, held an unspoken invitation, a promise of forbidden pleasure that sent tremors through my body. My breath hitched in my throat, a strangled gasp as my own desires warred with my sense of self-preservation. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a vortex of lust and dread. The shapes in the shadows moved closer, their forms becoming more defined, their movements more suggestive. They were a symphony of writhing flesh and ecstatic cries, a grotesque ballet that both repelled and enthralled me. I felt my own body react, a primal need awakening within me, a response to the raw sexuality emanating from the clearing, from the woman and the entities that surrounded her. My pulse quickened, my breath grew ragged, and a warmth spread through my lower body, a sensation both terrifying and intoxicating. My mind struggled to maintain its grip on reality, the line between sanity and surrender blurring with each passing moment. I could feel the eyes of the forest upon me, watching, judging, urging me to succumb to the primal urges that were bubbling to the surface. I finally managed to pull myself back, stumbling away from the clearing, not daring to look back. The last thing I saw was the professor, rooted to the spot, his gaze locked onto hers as she whispered things I'll never understand, her voice a hypnotic murmur that promised oblivion. He was a puppet in her hands, his will surrendered to her dark allure. I heard him calling for me as I ran, a desperate plea that was swallowed by the relentless whispers of the forest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. And I never saw him again. I ran blindly through the suffocating darkness, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming in protest. The forest seemed to mock my desperation, the trees reaching out with their skeletal branches as if to grasp me, to pull me back into the heart of the darkness. I stumbled and fell, my skin tearing on the rough bark, but I forced myself to rise, driven by a terror that was both physical and spiritual. The memory of the professor's desperate pleas echoes in my mind, a constant reminder of the dangers of unchecked curiosity, of the price one pays for delving too deep into the hidden corners of the world. I never found out what happened to him, and maybe I don't want to know. The image of his body, ravaged and broken, consumed by the insatiable hunger of the whore and her spectral retinue, haunts my dreams, a chilling reminder of the fragility of human existence in the face of ancient, unyielding powers. To this day, I avoid forests and that strange, suffocating silence they hold. The mere scent of damp earth and decaying leaves sends a shiver down my spine, a reminder of the horrors I witnessed. Every now and then, I hear whispers in the night, faint and haunting, calling me back to that place, a siren song of forbidden knowledge and forbidden pleasure. The woman's words echo in the recesses of my mind, a constant reminder of the dangers of insatiable curiosity. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing," she whispered. "Some paths should remain unwalked. And a part of me wonders if one day I won't be able to resist, if the allure of the forbidden will be too strong to overcome. If I will succumb to the whispers, to the darkness that still lingers in the depths of my soul, and return to that clearing, to the arms of the whore, to the embrace of the ancient forest that holds the key to my deepest desires and my darkest fears." When I was 22, I met Linda, a wealthy woman in her late 40s, who took an immediate interest in me. We met at a fundraiser, The kind of event where the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the clinking of champagne flutes. I was there as a volunteer, helping with the coat check, a job I only accepted because it meant I could wear a suit and feel like I belonged, even if it was just for a night. Linda was everything I wasn't. She wore a dazzling diamond necklace that could have bought a small island, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you can afford to buy anything you desire. But there was something about her, a vulnerability that peeked through the polished exterior, that drew me in. She seemed genuinely interested in me, asking about my studies and my dreams, not in the polite, dismissive way that some wealthy people do, but with a warmth that surprised me. I learned she wasn't super rich herself, but her connections were powerful. She had made her fortune not with inherited wealth, but by investing in properties for the ultra-elite, who often never stepped foot in the luxurious estates they owned. These were the kind of people who bought a sprawling mansion in the Hamptons just for summer weekends, or a French chateau to impress a foreign dignitary, seemingly unconcerned with the practicalities of actually living there. Linda would call me over to these sprawling mansions, insisting that I spend weekends with her. She paid me handsomely, $1,000 a weekend, to keep her company, and I didn't complain. I was young, still finishing my degree, and the money was a godsend. I was also curious. Linda's world was a glimpse into a life I could only imagine, a life that was both alluring and unsettling. Her favorite place was a remote estate in the Catskills, high up in the mountains, with high walls and massive, empty rooms that felt more like a fortress than a home. We'd drive up there in her sleek black Mercedes, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional comment on the scenery from Linda. She never seemed to tire of pointing out the sprawling oaks or the majestic views. The estate, she explained, belonged to a powerful media mogul who only used it once a year, for a lavish party. The rest of the year, it stood silent, a monument to excess. I found myself wandering through the cavernous rooms, overwhelmed by the sheer size and emptiness. The furniture was opulent, but there was no sign of life, no personal touch, no evidence of habitation. It felt like a museum for the rich and bored. On our second weekend at the estate, Linda led me to a bathroom bigger than my entire apartment. It had a walk-in shower the size of a small bedroom, with walls of frosted glass and a showerhead that sprayed water like a tropical monsoon. She watched me with a strange fascination as I turned on the shower, the water cascading over me in a warm, soothing deluge. "Do you know how much these walls could tell?" she whispered, her voice unsettlingly close to my ear. I turned around, the hot water streaming down my face. She was standing there, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the shower stall, a strange, almost manic smile playing on her lips. I shrugged. "They're just walls, Linda." She chuckled, a dry, brittle sound that sent shivers down my spine. "They're more than walls, darling. They've seen things." She leaned closer, her breath warm on my cheek. "They've seen things you wouldn't believe." I leaned back, uncomfortable with her intensity. "They're just a bathroom, Linda." She stepped back, the manic smile replaced by a look of disappointment. "You're so young, so innocent. You don't see it, do you?" As the water ran down my body, I noticed something. Deep, dark stains ran down the tiles, almost like dried blood. I stared at them, my stomach twisting in uneasy suspicion. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Linda's smile returned, wider than before, reaching her eyes, which shone with an unnatural light. "It's nothing to worry about, darling. Just a little accident." "A little accident?" I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. "They like to keep things clean here," she said, her voice strangely calm. "For when they come back." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. I turned off the shower, the water suddenly cold. I didn't know what she was talking about, but I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. The stains on the tiles, the unsettling smile on Linda's face, the strange emptiness of the mansion, all combined to create a nightmarish tableau that haunted my dreams. I lay awake, listening to the wind howling outside, every creak of the old house sounding like a malevolent footstep. Linda was gone by morning, leaving a note on the counter, thanking me for my company, and offering to pay me for another weekend at a different estate. I crumpled the note in my hand, a wave of nausea washing over me. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to ever see that mansion again. I left the estate, the silence of the empty rooms ringing in my ears. The world outside seemed brighter, more alive, after the oppressive gloom of the mansion. I drove back to the city, each mile taking me further away from the darkness that had settled over me. I never answered Linda's calls again. The money, the luxury, the company, it all seemed meaningless compared to the chilling truth I had glimpsed in the stained tiles. I didn't know what happened at that mansion, what secrets were hidden behind those walls, but I knew I didn't want to find out. The experience left me with a lingering sense of unease. The wealthy lives, the opulent homes, the silent emptiness, it all felt like a facade, a carefully constructed mask hiding something sinister beneath the surface. I realized that the world I had seen at those estates, the world of the ultra-rich, was a world I never wanted to be a part of. I went back to my studies, focused on my future, and tried to forget the unsettling weekend. But the memory of that bathroom, the dark stains, and Linda's unsettling smile, continued to haunt me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been a witness to something dark and dangerous, a secret that was better left buried. The truth, I knew, was hidden somewhere in the shadows, forever concealed behind the high walls of the mansion in the Catskills. Years passed, and the incident faded into a hazy memory. I eventually graduated, found a job, and built a life for myself. But sometimes, on a cold winter night, when the wind howls outside my window, I think of Linda, of the mansion, of the stains on the tiles, and I feel a shiver run down my spine. The memory of the weekend at the estate, a weekend that began with a dazzling necklace and a promising offer, ended with a chilling whisper and a lingering unease that has never truly left me. I still wonder what really happened at that mansion, what secrets those walls concealed. But I know one thing, some secrets are better left buried. And some truths, no matter how disturbing, are better left unspoken. One day, while browsing online, I came across a news article about the media mogul who owned the estate. He had been arrested for money laundering and other financial crimes. The article mentioned that he had used a network of offshore accounts and shell companies to hide his ill-gotten gains. The connection hit me like a punch to the gut. The accidents at the mansion, the cleaning that Linda had mentioned, the unsettling emptiness of the room, it all suddenly made sense. I had witnessed a glimpse into the dark underbelly of wealth, a world where power was used as a weapon and where the consequences of wrongdoing were buried, literally, behind the high walls of a remote mansion. I realized that the wealthy world I had been exposed to wasn't just about diamonds and champagne, but about something darker, something more sinister. It was a world of secrets, lies, and hidden truths, a world where the lines between right and wrong blurred and where the consequences of crossing the line could be dire. I felt a surge of anger and disappointment, but also a sense of relief. The secrets I had glimpsed were finally out in the open, the truth exposed for all to see. The mansion in the Catskills, once a symbol of my naive curiosity, now stood as a reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of wealth and power. The incident taught me a valuable lesson. It made me realize that the world is a complex place, full of contradictions and hidden truths. It made me question the assumptions I had made about wealth and privilege, and it taught me to be wary of the allure of things that seemed too good to be true. Most of all, it made me appreciate the simple things in life, the things that money can't buy, the genuine connections that matter most. The mansion in the Catskills might have been a symbol of wealth, but it was also a reminder of the importance of integrity, honesty, and the pursuit of a life lived with purpose, not just with material possessions. The memory of that weekend, the unsettling encounter with Linda, and the dark secrets of the mansion, still lingered in my mind, but they no longer haunted me. They had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the shadows that can lurk beneath the surface, and a testament to the importance of seeking the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And as I look back on that time, I realized that the most valuable thing I had learned wasn't about the world of wealth and power, but about the importance of trusting my gut and following my own compass, even when the path ahead is unclear. It was late summer in the outskirts of New Orleans. The heat clung to the air, thick with humidity, as I pulled my truck into the shadowy lot of an old, run-down building on the edge of the French Quarter. The place had once been a speakeasy during Prohibition, but now it was little more than a hushed whisper among locals. A spot where stories of the past lingered in the air, and the smell of danger was always on the horizon. The paint on the building was peeling, the faded signage barely visible in the dim light. The windows were grimy, offering only obscured glimpses of the interior. It was the kind of place that whispered secrets, a haven for those who sought darkness and anonymity. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I knew I wouldn't find it in the bright lights of Bourbon Street. This was a place for shadows, for hidden desires and whispered promises. I had heard rumors, dark, twisted rumors, about a woman who frequented the place. People called her Lola. They said she had a presence that could freeze you in place, like an animal caught in the headlights of a truck barreling down the road. Her beauty wasn't just skin deep, it was something primal, something that clawed at your soul. Some said she was a siren, luring men to their doom with her intoxicating allure. Others claimed she was a succubus, a creature of the night that fed on the life force of those she entangled. There was a morbid fascination that drew me to this place, a desire to unravel the mysteries that swirled around Lola. I had heard snippets of her story, whispers in dimly lit bars and hushed conversations in smoky backrooms. She was said to have been a dancer, a performer who had captivated audiences with her grace and charisma. But those who knew her best spoke of a darkness within her, a coldness that chilled them to the bone. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, or what I hoped to find. Perhaps a glimpse into the heart of this enigma, a chance to understand the allure that drew so many towards her. Or maybe it was simply the thrill of the unknown, the intoxicating danger that pulsed beneath the surface of this weathered building. I first saw her through the fogged window of the bar, the dim lighting casting shadows on her face. She sat alone, her legs crossed, a cigarette dangling lazily between her fingers. Her red lips parted slightly as she stared into her drink, her eyes clouded with secrets. Her hair, a cascade of midnight black, framed her face in a delicate veil. She wore a simple black dress that clung to her curves, highlighting an elegance that was both alluring and intimidating. But it wasn't just her beauty that pulled me in. There was something else, something that called to me, as if I had no choice but to answer. It was a primal tug, a magnetic force that drew me towards her like a moth to a flame. I felt a strange sense of urgency, a need to be near her, to unravel the mysteries that surrounded her. I walked in, the creaking door announcing my presence. The air inside was thick and stale, a haze of cigarette smoke and cheap perfume clinging to the atmosphere. The bar was sparsely decorated, with faded velvet curtains and a worn wooden bar that had witnessed countless stories unfold over the years. A few patrons sat scattered around the room, their faces obscured by the dim lighting, their conversations muted and indistinct. Her gaze lifted, locking onto mine with a predatory precision that made my heart race. The air between us thickened, electric with the weight of the unspoken. It was as if time itself had slowed down, the only sound the rhythmic clinking of ice cubes in a nearby glass. "You're late," she said, her voice low, honeyed but dangerous. The words were like velvet claws, caressing my ears while threatening to tear me apart. "I was starting to wonder if you had the guts to come." I took a seat across from her, my skin crawling with a mixture of fear and desire. The scent of her perfume, an intoxicating blend of jasmine and something darker, filled my senses. It was a heady aroma that stirred something deep within me, a longing that I couldn't explain. "I'm here now," I muttered, not sure what had drawn me in. Something told me it wasn't just the alcohol, or the rumors. There was an undeniable pull, a magnetism that I couldn't resist. Lola smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that made my stomach twist. "I don't bite, unless you asked me to." Her eyes held a mischievous glint, as if she knew the depths of my desires, the secret yearnings that simmered beneath the surface. Her words were like a challenge, and I couldn't resist. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a mixture of fear and anticipation rattling in my throat. She leaned in, the scent of her perfume intensifying, enveloping me in its intoxicating embrace. "I want everything. I want your mind, your body, your soul." She licked her lips, as if savoring the taste of her own words, relishing the power she held over me. I felt my pulse quicken as she slid her fingers across the table, tracing the edge of my hand with a feather-light touch. My body betrayed me, a sharp hunger spreading through me as her nails grazed the skin on my palm. It was a strange sensation, a mixture of pleasure and unease, a dance between attraction and fear. "Do you know what it's like to be consumed?" she whispered, her voice a seductive rasp that sent shivers down my spine. "To feel every part of you unravel under my touch?" Before I could respond, Lola stood, her heels clicking on the wood floor like a countdown. She moved closer, her body swaying with a rhythm that felt both hypnotic and dangerous. It was a mesmerizing dance, a predator circling its prey, her every move calculated and precise. Without warning, she grabbed my wrist and pulled me out of the chair. I stumbled, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to regain my balance. "Come with me," she commanded, her voice a sharp whip that sent a thrill down my spine. It was a command, not a request, and I felt a strange sense of obedience, a willingness to follow her into the unknown. I didn't hesitate. I followed her, as she led me through the dimly lit back hallways, the air growing cooler with each step. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the silence became, the more everything felt wrong. The familiar sounds of the bar faded, replaced by an unnerving quiet that seemed to press in on me from all sides. But I couldn't pull away. My body felt numb, my will overridden by an unseen force that propelled me forward. We entered a room that smelled of old leather and something metallic, a scent that lingered in the air like a forgotten memory. There was a large, four-poster bed in the center, the thick curtains drawn shut, creating a secluded haven of darkness. The air was heavy with something darker, a palpable sense of foreboding that hung in the air. Lola turned to face me, her eyes glinting with something feral, something that made my heart race. "You wanted this," she purred. "Now you'll get it. All of it." She pushed me onto the bed, straddling me with a predatory grace that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her hands worked quickly, tearing at my clothes, leaving me exposed and vulnerable beneath her. The fabric ripped and tore, the sounds echoing in the oppressive silence of the room. I felt a strange mixture of shame and excitement, a sense of surrender as I relinquished control. Her lips found mine in a brutal kiss, her teeth grazing my bottom lip, drawing blood. It was sharp, painful, intoxicating. A strange mix of sensations flooded through me, a confusing blend of agony and pleasure. I kissed her back, the taste of blood mixing with the desperate need that was rapidly consuming me. It was a primal dance, a desperate attempt to grasp onto something, anything, in the face of the unknown. But the pleasure was mixed with a strange, suffocating dread. Lola's movements were frantic, violent, as if she was trying to rip something from me. I could feel her nails digging into my skin, leaving marks that would last long after the night ended. Her touch was both exhilarating and painful, a whirlwind of raw emotion that I couldn't comprehend. She pulled back, her eyes dark and hungry. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. Her voice was husky, laced with a raw intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "The hunger, the need, it's never enough." Before I could respond, Lola's hands gripped my throat, tightening with an almost unbearable pressure. She was choking me, her gaze never leaving mine as she watched the panic flicker in my eyes. It was a terrifying display of power, a reminder of the fragile nature of life. The air grew thick, the pressure building in my chest as I gasped for breath, my vision blurring at the edges. But then, just as quickly as she had started, she released me, and I coughed violently, gasping for air. My hand shot out to grab her, to pull her close again, to feel the connection that had consumed me, but she stepped back, a wicked smile curling on her lips. "You're mine now," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You'll never be the same." I didn't know if I could trust myself anymore. She had broken something inside me, something I couldn't fix. My mind raced, trying to grasp onto the fragments of my identity, but they were shattered, scattered like broken glass. The line between reality and illusion had blurred, and I was lost in the murky waters of her desires. And I knew that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to escape, I would always be drawn back to her, to the madness she offered. It was a curse, a dark enchantment that bound me to her will. The last thing I remembered was her lips on my neck, her breath warm and sweet against my skin, as I gave in completely. I felt a strange sense of peace, a surrender to the darkness that had consumed me. My body was a vessel, a canvas upon which she painted her desires, and I was nothing more than a willing participant in her game. I was hers, body and soul, forever bound to the intoxicating madness of Lola. When I was 22, I met a woman named Isabella on a dating app during a college break. She was 35, with an air of mystery that intrigued me. We met for dinner, and I was quickly drawn into her dark allure. After our date, we went back to her place, where she showed me a side of herself that was both thrilling and unsettling. We spent the night together, and the next morning, she invited me to a shopping trip. At the mall, Isabella's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. She casually offered to buy me a high-end jacket, and paid with a stack of blood-stained cash she pulled from a folder in her purse. I questioned it, but she dismissed my concerns with a cold, sinister smile. She even slipped a few $100s into my bag before driving me home. Over the following months, Isabella's gifts became increasingly strange and extravagant. Money appeared in my account with cryptic messages attached, and she sent me disturbing, yet enticing, packages filled with unusual items. Her overt generosity was matched by a chilling, almost sadistic pleasure she seemed to derive from watching me use the gifts. When I returned home for another break, our encounter turned even darker. After an intimate night together, she left a gruesome note detailing her twisted fantasies and expectations, wrapped in blood-soaked tissue. Soon after, she disappeared from all contact, leaving me with the haunting gifts and the chilling memory of her erratic, dangerous affection. Despite the warning signs, I couldn't deny the thrill of being with Isabella. She was a force of nature, and I was both repelled and drawn to her at the same time. I couldn't help but wonder where she had gone, and what had become of her. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself unable to forget about Isabella. I tried dating other women, but none of them could compare to the excitement and danger that she had brought into my life. I couldn't stop thinking about her, and I found myself constantly checking my phone and email for any sign of her. One day, as I was scrolling through my social media feed, I saw a post from a local news station. They were reporting on a high-profile murder case, and the suspect was none other than Isabella. My heart raced as I read the details of the case. Isabella was accused of killing her husband and several other men, and the evidence against her was mounting. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I had suspected that Isabella was involved in something illegal, but I never would have imagined that she was a killer. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I had been intimate with a dangerous criminal. Despite the risks, I couldn't stay away. I had to see Isabella again, to find out the truth about what had happened. I contacted her lawyer and arranged to visit her in prison. When I saw Isabella for the first time in months, I was shocked by her appearance. She looked gaunt and pale, with dark circles under her eyes. But despite her frail appearance, she still had the same cold, calculating gaze that I remembered. "I knew you would come," she said, as I approached her cell. "I've been thinking about you ever since I was arrested." I tried to remain calm, but I couldn't hide my fear. "What happened, Isabella? Why did you kill all those men?" She smiled, a cold, sinister smile. "Let's just say that they didn't live up to my expectations. They were weak, pathetic creatures who didn't deserve to live. Just like you." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, just like me? You're just like them, Mark. You're weak, and you're easily manipulated." I knew you would come back to me, just like they did. And now that I have you, I'm not going to let you go. I tried to back away, but it was too late. Isabella's guards were already closing in, and I knew that I was trapped. I had come to see the woman I had once loved, and now I was going to pay the price for my curiosity. As I was led out of the prison, I couldn't help but wonder what had become of me. I had been seduced by a dangerous woman, and now I was caught up in her web of violence and deceit. I had let my desires cloud my judgment, and now I was paying the price. I knew that I would never be able to forget about Isabella, but I also knew that I had to move on. I had to put the past behind me and start fresh. I had to find a way to escape the memory of the sugar mommy who had seduced me, manipulated me, and nearly destroyed me. And so, with a heavy heart, I said goodbye to Isabella and the dangerous, thrilling world she had introduced me to. I knew that I would never forget her, but I also knew that I had to leave her behind and start a new chapter in my life. It was the only way to survive. I was standing in the dim light of the club, eyes fixed on her. The music was pounding, making my blood race, every beat like a pulse inside my head. I was fucked up, and I knew she was too. I could see it in the way she moved, swaying with a rhythm that seemed to flow from somewhere deep within her. My mind was foggy, but I couldn't stop staring. She was beautiful, intoxicating even. Her hips swayed, her body a blur of motion that I couldn't pull my eyes from. Probably on something. Hell, so was I. That's why we were both here. The smoke, the lights, the sweat, it all just melted together into a world I didn't want to leave. And then she turned. Her eyes scanned the room and I froze. There was no way she could see me, not with the shadows swallowing me whole. Still, I couldn't help myself. I was stuck in place, watching her like a predator. She wasn't looking for me, but in that moment, I was certain she felt my gaze. A shiver ran down my spine, a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The lights flickered, and just as quickly, she was gone again, swallowed up by the crowd. I cursed under my breath and followed her, weaving through bodies that didn't matter to me. Nothing else did, just her. My heart was pounding now, every second feeling like it stretched into eternity. The bass vibrated through the floor, a constant reminder of the altered state I was in. My senses were heightened, amplified by whatever concoction I'd ingested earlier. The world was a kaleidoscope of flashing lights and distorted sounds, and she was the only focal point, the only color that mattered in this chaotic landscape. But then, like clockwork, I fucked it up. Some kid, probably a couple years younger than me, spotted me. I barely remembered his name, but I wasn't in the mood for this. I dealt with his kind before, always looking for something. A quick high, a cheap thrill. They were leeches, clinging to the fringes of the scene, desperate for a connection, a fix. "What's up, man? Got anything?" he asked, practically bouncing on his heels. His eyes were wide, eager, the kind of eyes that held a desperate hunger. I could feel the irritation building up, but I didn't let it show. My patience was wearing thin, like a thread frayed at the edges. "Nah. Go see Tony," I muttered, pushing him away. Come on." He moved closer, all teeth and desperate energy. "Help me out." I didn't have time for this. The girl was slipping away, and I needed her. I needed to unravel the mystery she presented, to understand the darkness that flickered in her eyes, the way she seemed to inhabit a different plane of existence. So I turned, shaking him off, and went back to searching. Where the hell had she gone? The crowd was a swirling mass of bodies, a sea of faces that all blurred together. The music was a relentless force, a pounding rhythm that pulsed through my veins, but it couldn't drown out the frantic pounding of my heart. I scanned the room, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't see her anymore. Fuck. With a sigh, I turned for the exit. I was done. If tonight wasn't it, then it wasn't going to happen. I couldn't chase her forever, not in this haze of confusion and desire. I needed to clear my head, to regain some semblance of control. I couldn't keep searching for her in this state of perpetual intoxication. As I stepped outside into the cool air, the rain had started, light at first, then heavier, the chill creeping under my skin. The sudden shift in temperature was a shock to my system, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the club. I fumbled through my jacket for a cigarette, lighting it quickly, the flame flickering in the dark. My hands were shaking. I was coming down. The euphoria was fading, replaced by a creeping sense of unease and vulnerability. The world was sharpening into focus, the edges no longer blurred, and the harsh reality of my situation was starting to sink in. I should have hit Tony up for more, but it was too late now. Then I heard it. Her voice. "Got a light?" I turned fast, already thinking it was some random chick. But no, it was her. The one I'd been stalking all night. The one who had consumed my every thought, the source of this inexplicable obsession. "Sure." I handed her the lighter, trying to keep my composure. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't decide whether I wanted to kiss her or strangle her. All I knew was that I had to keep her here. I had her now, a fleeting moment of triumph in the midst of my descending high. She inhaled deeply, her eyes locking onto mine. For a split second, I almost forgot everything else. It was just her. I could feel her energy, the way it flowed between us, like some invisible thread pulling me closer. I couldn't look away, captivated by the enigmatic intensity in her gaze. "Are you from around here?" Her voice broke through the silence, and I barely heard her words, lost in the vortex of my own thoughts and emotions. I shrugged, keeping my cool. "No." She tilted her head, narrowing her eyes a little. "Funny, you look familiar." I gave her my best grin, a forced expression that felt hollow in the face of her perceptive gaze. "Maybe I got one of those faces," I said, trying to brush it off. She didn't know. None of them did. The truth, the dark underbelly of my existence, was a secret I guarded jealously. She said, and then smiled back. "You want to get a coffee or something?" I couldn't help but smile at that. She was more than I expected. And I wasn't about to let this slip away. Not after chasing her through the smoky labyrinth of the club, not after the near misses and the frustrated sighs. "Sure." We headed to a cafe nearby, and the whole time, she kept talking, but I barely heard her. I was too focused on the way her lips moved, the way she shifted in her seat, the subtle gestures that hinted at a hidden depth beneath her seemingly casual demeanor. She was playing with me. And I wasn't about to lose. Not this time. It was getting colder outside, and the rain was coming down harder. She caught me staring, and there was something about her that drew me in, a magnetism that transcended words and logic. Her lips were smudged from the coffee, and her hair was a mess, but she was perfect. Imperfectly perfect, like a shattered mirror reflecting a distorted image of beauty. She offered to get us another coffee, and as I handed her a cigarette, I caught the little things, her eyes, the way she carried herself. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't as innocent as she looked. She was aware of everything. We exchanged small talk, but it was all just noise. The way she moved, the way her eyes flicked around, kept me on edge. I could feel it, the tension building, the moment stretching between us like a tight wire, poised to snap. Finally, she broke the silence. "Wanna get out of here?" It was like everything clicked. I nodded, grinning like an idiot. "Okay." I drove her back to my place, my mind spinning with all the possibilities. But as soon as we were alone, it was clear she knew exactly what she was doing. She was playing me, just like I wanted her to. A game of cat and mouse, with both of us equally entangled in the pursuit. And when her lips finally met mine, I knew we were past the point of no return. The rest of the night went by in a haze of sweat and blood, of tangled sheets and desperate touches. It was a dance of primal urges and unspoken desires, a whirlwind of passion and chaos. It wasn't love. It was something darker, something more raw and untamed. It wasn't until I had her pinned beneath me, her blood spilling slowly from the wound I'd made, that I realized she'd been just as lost as I was. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she walked into my life. Her darkness mirrored my own, and in that moment of shared depravity, we found a twisted connection. Her final breath was a soft gasp, and I couldn't help but kiss her once more, tasting the blood that flowed between us. It was a macabre communion, a final act of possession in a night consumed by obsession. The rain continued to fall outside, washing away the remnants of our twisted encounter. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows, a silent witness to the night's descent into madness. And I, the predator who had finally caught his prey, was left alone in the aftermath, the echoes of her final gasp ringing in my ears, a haunting reminder of the darkness that resided within us both. She was in her early 40s, a successful entrepreneur with a taste for the finer things in life. I was 24, working as an intern at a small tech firm, and our paths crossed when she became a client. Her sophistication and charm immediately captivated me. Elena was far more than just a wealthy businesswoman. She was a mystery wrapped in luxury. After several professional meetings, she invited me to her opulent penthouse for dinner. The place was a blend of modern elegance and old-world decadence. The walls were lined with priceless art, and the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes. During dinner, her demeanor shifted. What began as polite conversation quickly turned into a dark game of seduction. Elena was a master at blending pleasure with pain. As the night progressed, she introduced me to a world of intense experiences. Behind her facade of wealth was a dark, brutal side that she expressed through elaborate, twisted scenarios involving chains, whips, and grotesque yet erotic art. Each session left me bruised, both physically and mentally, yet I couldn't stay away. Elena's blend of eroticism and cruelty was intoxicating. She reveled in her control, pushing boundaries in ways I never imagined. When I tried to escape, I found myself ensnared in a web of psychological torment, revealing the true cost of her affection. Our twisted affair ended abruptly, leaving me both haunted and exhilarated by the dark depths of desire and brutality I had experienced. Underscore 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 underscore. I met Elena at a tech industry event. She was the epitome of success, a self-made millionaire with a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. I was just a lowly intern, but she took an interest in me. After the event, she invited me to dinner at her penthouse. I was hesitant at first, but curiosity got the better of me. The moment I stepped into her apartment, I was transported to another world. The place was opulent, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the city. Elena herself was even more beautiful than I had imagined, with dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a body that could make a supermodel envious. We started with drinks in her living room, and I was immediately drawn to her intelligence and wit. She had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. As the evening progressed, we moved to the dining room, where a sumptuous meal had been prepared. Elena was an excellent cook, and the food was delicious. After dinner, we retired to the living room for coffee and dessert. It was then that Elena's demeanor began to change. She started by asking me about my life, and I told her about my job, my family, and my dreams. She listened intently, and I could tell that she was genuinely interested in me. But then, she started to ask me more personal questions. She wanted to know about my sexual experiences, my fantasies, and my deepest desires. At first, I was hesitant to answer, but Elena had a way of making me feel comfortable. She was so open and honest with me, and I found myself sharing things with her that I had never told anyone else. As the night went on, Elena's questions became more and more explicit. She wanted to know about my deepest, darkest fantasies. I was embarrassed at first, but Elena was so encouraging, and I found myself telling her things that I had never even admitted to myself. By the end of the night, I felt like I had known Elena for years. She had a way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the world. I left her apartment that night feeling both exhilarated and confused. I had never met anyone like Elena before. She was intelligent, beautiful, and successful, but there was also a dark side to her that I couldn't quite understand. I tried to put her out of my mind, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I wanted to see her again, but I was afraid of what might happen if I did. A few days later, I received a call from Elena. She invited me to dinner again, and I accepted. This time, things were different. Elena was more aggressive, and she made it clear that she wanted me sexually. I was hesitant at first, but Elena was so persuasive, and I found myself giving in to her desires. We spent the night together, and it was like nothing I had ever experienced before. Elena was a passionate and experienced lover, and she knew exactly how to please me. After that night, I became Elena's regular sugar baby. I would visit her several times a week, and we would spend hours together, exploring our darkest desires. Elena was always in control, and she loved to push my boundaries. She would often make me do things that I never thought I would do, and I found myself enjoying it. I knew that our relationship was dangerous, but I couldn't help myself. I was addicted to Elena's dark side, and I craved her touch. But as time went on, I started to realize that Elena was not who she seemed. Behind her facade of wealth and success, there was a dark and twisted secret. I discovered that Elena had a history of violence. She had been involved in several abusive relationships, and she had even been arrested for assault. I also learned that Elena was not as wealthy as she had led me to believe. She was in debt, and she was using me to pay for her lavish lifestyle. I confronted Elena about her lies, and she broke down and confessed everything. She told me that she was lonely and desperate, and that she had used me to fill a void in her life. I felt sorry for Elena, but I also knew that I had to get away from her. She was dangerous, and I was afraid of what she might do to me. I broke off our relationship, and I never saw Elena again. But even though it's been years since our last encounter, I still think about her sometimes. I wonder what happened to her, and if she ever found happiness. I also wonder if I will ever find someone who can make me feel the way Elena did. She was the most intense and passionate woman I have ever met, and I will never forget her. My name's Jessica. I'm 27, and I work at one of those flashy, overpriced strip clubs on the outskirts of the city, a place where men drown their sorrows in overpriced whiskey and fleeting fantasies. The club is called Velvet Dreams, though the dreams it promises are anything but soft. It's loud, dark, and smells of desperation and cologne that barely masks the stench of sweat. It's not a bad job. It pays well enough to keep me afloat, covers rent, keeps gas in my car, and leaves me a little extra for late-night Taco Bell runs. Sure, it comes with its fair share of creeps, but I've learned to deal with them. You smile, take the tips, and forget their faces the moment they walk out the door. But he was different. He showed up on a Thursday night, a slower shift when the regulars were already passed out at the bar. I noticed him immediately. You don't miss a guy like that. Tall, clean-cut, in a suit that was just a little too expensive for a place like this. He had this quiet intensity about him, like he wasn't there to drink or ogle like the others. He just sat in the shadows of the back booth, sipping a bourbon and watching. And I mean watching. Not just the stage, but me. At first, I brushed it off. Men stare. It's part of the gig. But this guy, he wasn't like the rest. He didn't shove bills in my thong like he owned me. He didn't lean over the stage and yell crude things, drunk off his ass. He just sat there, his eyes never leaving me. It was unnerving. But oddly enough, it was also kind of thrilling. The way he looked at me, it wasn't sleazy. It was like he was trying to memorize every curve, every move I made. I caught myself glancing back at him more than once during my routine, something I almost never do. It felt like I was dancing just for him. Toward the end of my set, he finally made his move. Not with cash at the stage like everyone else, but by flagging down a server and whispering something in her ear. Moments later, she came up to me in the dressing room. "VIP request," she said, handing me a folded bill. "He's asking for you by name." The bill was a crisp 100. I didn't think twice. The VIP room at Velvet Dreams isn't as glamorous as it sounds. It's a dimly lit, velvet-lined cubicle with just enough space for a small couch and a table. The rules are simple: no touching unless you pay for it, and even then, only above the waist. When I walked in, he was already seated, his long legs stretched out in front of him like he owned the place. He didn't smile when he saw me, but his eyes lit up in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. "Jessica," he said, his voice low and smooth. He gestured for me to sit beside him. "You've got my name," I replied, keeping my tone light. "What's yours?" He hesitated, like he was weighing whether to tell me the truth. "Call me Lucas," he said finally. "All right, Lucas," I said, slipping into my routine. "What can I do for you tonight?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in close, too close, and whispered, "You've got a scar on your left thigh. Right below your hip. How'd you get it?" I froze. The scar he was talking about wasn't something most people noticed, even when I was on stage. It was faint, a thin white line from a bike accident when I was 10. I hadn't thought about it in years. "Lucky guess," I said, forcing a smile, but my voice betrayed me. My heart was racing now. "And your coffee order?" he continued, ignoring my deflection. "A venti caramel macchiato, extra drizzle, 2 pumps of vanilla. Right?" The room felt like it was closing in. "How do you know that?" I demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back and smiled, like he just won a game I didn't know we were playing. I ended the session early. Told him I had another client waiting, which was a lie. As I walked out of the VIP room, I felt his eyes on me the entire way. My hands were trembling as I grabbed my purse and headed for the exit. I didn't even change out of my work clothes, just threw a jacket over my lingerie and bolted to my car. The parking lot was nearly empty, the club's neon sign casting long, flickering shadows across the asphalt. I glanced over my shoulder more than once as I unlocked my car, half expecting Lucas to be there, watching. But the lot was silent. I told myself to forget about him. Guys like that come and go. Maybe he'd seen me around town, or overheard a conversation I didn't remember. Creepy, sure, but not the end of the world. Or so I thought. The next few days were normal, or as normal as my life gets. I worked my shifts, ran errands, and tried not to think about Lucas. But then little things started happening. First, it was the coffee. One morning, I stopped by my usual Starbucks on the way to work. When I got to the counter, the barista handed me my drink before I even ordered. "It's already paid for," she said with a smile. "Caramel macchiato, extra drizzle, 2 pumps of vanilla." I glanced around, but the shop was empty. Then there were the flowers. A dozen red roses left on my doorstep, with no note. And the texts? They came late at night, always from an unknown number. Short, cryptic messages like, "You looked beautiful tonight," or "I can't stop thinking about you." At first, I tried to block the number, but the messages kept coming, each time from a different one. The breaking point came a week later. I was driving home from a late shift, the roads dark and empty. That's when I noticed the car behind me. A black sedan, its headlights trailing me like a predator stalking its prey. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But every turn I made, the car followed. My stomach twisted into knots as I pulled into my apartment complex. Instead of parking, I drove straight past the lot and back onto the main road. The sedan did the same. I drove for miles, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Finally, I pulled into a gas station, hoping the bright lights and security cameras would scare him off. The sedan slowed as it passed, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. My heart pounded as it disappeared down the road, leaving me alone in the fluorescent glow of the gas station. That night I barely slept. Every creak and shadow in my apartment felt like a threat. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I had to report this. But when I went to the police, they brushed me off. "Do you have any proof?" the officer asked, his tone bored. Proof. As if the text in the car and the flowers weren't enough. The final straw came 2 nights later. I was in bed, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps outside my window. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm as I whispered my address, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a shadow moved across the window, too tall and broad to be anyone but him. The police arrived 20 minutes later. By then, he was gone. They found footprints in the dirt outside my window, but nothing else. No fingerprints, no evidence. Just a lingering sense of dread that's never left me. It's been 6 months since that night. I quit my job at Velvet Dreams and moved to a new city, hoping to leave it all behind. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel his eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. And I wonder if I'll ever really be free. I awoke to another lonely morning at the orphanage, the faint scars on my arms serving as a reminder of the dark family secret I had recently uncovered. Most of my life had been spent at the mercy of the strict nuns and sadistic caretakers, my days a never-ending cycle of chores, prayer, and punishment. But that all changed the day I discovered the truth that my parents had been slaughtered in a twisted ritual to summon a lust demon. A creature I had unwittingly harbored inside me since birth, feeding on my innocence and growing stronger with each inhibition I shed. The demon's presence was a constant whisper in the back of my mind, urging me to indulge in ever more depraved acts. I knew I had to resist its pull, if I wanted to avoid unleashing its true form. But the temptation gnawed at me, making my imagination run wild with forbidden fantasies. As I lay in bed, the demon's voice was especially loud, taunting me about the liaisons I'd shared with girls in my bunk. Its encouragement had emboldened me to take things further. I'd been caught touching myself by a nun the previous night. The demon had relished the humiliation and shame as much as the pleasure. Sneaking out of the dorms, I made my way through the dark halls, heart pounding. I knew the consequences would be brutal punishment. But I had to get outside, to feel the chill night air on my flushed skin. Maybe it would calm the burning ache between my legs. I knew I should pray for forgiveness and blessing. Instead, I whispered blasphemous prayers, begging the demon to take me. Ignoring the shouts behind me, I fled the orphanage grounds into the shadowy woods. Twigs and branches scraped my bare skin as I ran, changing from a jog to a frantic sprint. My breath came in ragged gasps, panic and exhilaration mixing with arousal. Finally reaching a moonlit glade, I collapsed, sobbing. The demon purred its approval, urging me to release my frustration. Dropping to my knees, I surrendered to temptation. I tore off my nightgown and plunged my fingers into my dripping slit. Whimpering in shame and ecstasy, I fucked myself with wild abandon, not caring who might see. The demon fed on me, growing more powerful with each lewd thrust. Pleasure crashed through me as I came with a scream, a dark cord of power unfurling inside me. Lost in the haze, I barely registered the figures emerging from the shadows until a hand clamped over my mouth. A deep, lecherous chuckle sounded by my ear as my arms were pinned. Teary-eyed, I saw the nun from last night, plus 2 others I recognized. They yanked my arms out behind me, forcing me down. "You depraved girl, we knew you were possessed," the nun hissed, grabbing my hair and twisting my neck to face them. "The demon makes you want to rut like a bitch in heat, doesn't it? Go on, confess your sins." The nuns' voices were laced with disgust. But as their hands roamed my trembling body, I saw the bulges straining their habits. The demon flared triumphantly. "It would show them the depths of your corruption." I want it. I heard myself say, voice husky. I want to be defiled and used for your pleasure, holy mothers. Fuck me, fill me with your faith. The nuns exchanged looks, equal parts revulsion and dark hunger. Then they were on me, ripping away the last of my clothes. I felt cold metal press my inner thigh as one nun pressed a knife to my flesh. Scream for us, whore. Let the demon feast on your wails. The nun purred, blade carving a thin line up my thigh. I screamed as pain blossomed, blood oozing over the nun's bared breasts. The cut throbbed in time with the pulse between my legs. Fingers dug into my cunt, pumping roughly. A burning cock prodded my face as a second nun mounted me. I turned my head and took him in my mouth, choking on his length. The nun's heavy balls slapped my chin as he hilted down my throat. He grabbed my hair and started to fuck my face with brutal strokes. Drool ran down my neck as I gagged. The third nun was between my legs, tongue lashing my clit. I held around the cock in my mouth, bucking into the nun's face. Pleasure and violation short-circuited my brain, the demon drinking in each debased sensation. My screams harmonized with the squelch of fingers prying me open, the nun's grunts as I ate me out. Unholy prayers mingled with my moans, the nuns damning my soul even as they used my body. They brought me to the edge again and again, denying release, building my ecstasy with each cruel tease. The cock in my mouth pulsed, erupting in thick spurts. I gulped down the salty fluid, savoring the taboo flavor. The nun between my legs stood, jerking her length from a hidden slit. I watched through a film of tears, mouth agape, as the nun rubbed her cock head against my clenching hole. Then she was pushing in, splitting me open on her thick shaft. I shrieked at the sudden intrusion, back bowing. The nun hilted in me in one brutal thrust, heavy balls slapping my ass. Pinned between the two nuns, I couldn't move, could only take their pistoning lengths. They used me like a sheath, each driving into my holes with brutal fervor. Pleasure bordered on pain, my walls stretched and battered by the relentless fucking. Drool and cum dripped down my chin, their heavy grunts and my whimpers filling the glade. One nun reached beneath to furiously strum my clit. The demon's power surged, my cunt clenching like a vice. I came with a long, broken wail, clear fluid gushing around the cock in my pussy. The nuns followed, pumping me full of their unholy seed. I felt the demon swell with each corrupt load, my body distending. Sweat soaked and smeared with fluids, the nuns finally pulled out with a wet squelch. I lay boneless, holes gaping and oozing. The demon's power roared through me, strong enough to see by its infernal light. I rose on shaky legs, the nuns staring at me with a mix of fear and dark awe. I licked my lips, a cruel smile curving them. Thank you, holy mothers, I purred, voice guttural. You freed me, freed us. Shall we finish this ritual? The nun's eyes widened in dawning horror as the demon took control. My back arched, vertebrae cracking as a barbed tail split my skin. Horns curled from my brow, my teeth elongating into fangs. Obsidian flesh rippled and bulged, reforming into a succubus. A phallus sprouted between my legs, a scaly cock dripping venom. What have we done? One nun whispered, crossing myself. It's the lust demon. Yes, I hissed, my voice layered with the demon's growl. And you'll help me feed my little nuns. You'll all feed me in the orphanage. Every soul will be mine. Claws flexed, I reached for the nearest nun, pulling her close. The nun screamed as my tail coiled around her, dragging her into a paralyzing kiss. I drank in her terror, the nun going limp in her embrace. I tossed the body aside, the corpse's expression frozen in bliss. The remaining nuns fled, skirts hiked up as they trampled the underbrush. My laugh chased them, shifting into a shriek of pleasure as her cock surged to full mast. I set off after them, the glade silent save for my pounding feet and the demon's gloating chuckles. It all began with a glance. Just a brief moment where her eyes locked onto mine, sharp and calculating. I could feel the weight of it. Something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. It was more than just attraction. It was as if she knew something about me, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The way she looked at me made it clear, she wasn't just interested. She was hunting. I should have left. I should have walked out of that bar, away from her unnerving gaze. But there was something magnetic about her, a pull that was impossible to ignore. I'd been with women before, but none like her. She had a darkness about her that I couldn't quite understand. It wasn't just the way she looked, it was the way she moved, the confidence in every step. She wasn't the type to wait for attention, she demanded it. Without thinking, I found myself drawn toward her. The room felt colder the closer I got, the air thicker, as if the very space between us had changed. She smiled, small, knowing, almost predatory. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. "You look like you want something," she whispered, her voice low and rough like gravel scraping against metal. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't know how to respond. My body moved on its own, stepping closer to her. She was already circling me, her body brushing against mine as she led me outside, down the alley behind the bar. The night air was damp and filled with the stench of decay, but none of that registered. Not when I was focused on her, the way her body moved, the way the dim light caught in her eyes, making them shine with something dark and hungry. Her apartment was a reflection of her, dirty, grimy, chaotic. The walls peeled like the skin of a rotting corpse, and the floors were cracked and uneven. Yet none of it mattered. Not when she was standing in front of me, close enough that I could smell the faint traces of something intoxicating on her skin, something sweet and metallic. My heart pounded, an urgency building that I couldn't control. I had to have her. I wasn't sure why, but I couldn't stop myself. Without a word, she pushed me up against the wall. Her lips crushed against mine, bruising, demanding. Her kiss was sharp, desperate, like she was trying to devour me. I had no room to think. The world outside her apartment had ceased to exist. There was only her, only the force of her desire pushing me into submission. Her hands were everywhere, tearing at my clothes, pulling at my skin, leaving marks that burned. Her touch was unrelenting, but it didn't hurt. It was raw. It was intense. I wasn't sure if I was losing myself in her, or if she was pulling something from me I didn't even know I had. She wasn't gentle. She didn't need to be. She took what she wanted, and I didn't stop her. She moved down my body, her hands and lips tracing every inch of me with rough abandon, as if marking me, claiming me. Her nails scraped against my skin, drawing blood, and the pain only made my pulse race faster, wilder. I wasn't sure if I was still in control, or if I'd ever been in control at all. All I could feel was her, the heat of her body against mine, the wildness in her eyes, the hunger in her every movement. When she spoke again, her voice was cold, calculated, as if she were issuing a command, not a request. "You're mine now," she murmured. Her fingers dug into my chest, her grip possessive, unyielding. "You're not leaving here. Not until I'm done with you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. And yet I didn't want to leave. I couldn't. The pull she had on me was something I couldn't explain, but it was real. She controlled the space between us, every breath I took, every move I made. She was a storm, and I was the center of it. A helpless, willing part of the chaos. Her lips found my neck again, her teeth sinking into my skin, and the pain was sharp but intoxicating. It was like a fever, too much to resist, but too overwhelming to understand. I could feel her pull everything from me, stripping away whatever defenses I thought I had. I was losing myself to her, and I didn't care. She didn't slow down. She kept pushing, kept claiming me in ways I couldn't comprehend, couldn't even begin to fight. She wasn't gentle. She wasn't caring. She was taking me apart, piece by piece, and I let her. There was something deeply carnal about it, something savage. And the more she took, the more I wanted to give. When it was over, when the world finally came back into focus, I was left breathless, my body trembling. I looked up at her, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something more than desire in her eyes, satisfaction. She'd done what she came here to do, and I was nothing more than another conquest. Another body, she claimed. She ran her fingers lightly over the marks on my skin, as if admiring her work. "You'll keep coming back," she said, her tone confident, as though there was no room for argument. "Because you want it. You need it." And she was right. I needed it. But that didn't scare me. It should have, but it didn't. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know what I was willing to become. But all I knew in that moment was that I couldn't stop myself from falling deeper into her world. I was already hers. I remember the day I arrived at the convent like it was yesterday. It was a gloomy, overcast autumn morning, the kind that seeps into your bones and chills you to the marrow. The air, crisp and biting, carried the scent of decaying leaves, their vibrant crimson and gold a cruel mockery of the bleakness in my heart. I was a young woman, barely 18, fresh out of the orphanage and adrift in a world that offered me nothing but cold streets and colder indifference. Joining the order was my only choice, a desperate gamble against the brutal reality of my past. I knew little of the nuns, their rituals, their lives, only that these stone walls offered a refuge from the biting wind. As I stepped through the imposing oak doors, a palpable sense of unease settled over me. The hallowed halls seemed to swallow the sound of my hesitant footsteps, the silence broken only by the soft scrape of worn leather slippers on polished stone. The sisters moved like shadows, their heads bowed low, their faces obscured by thick, starched veils and severe habits. Their eyes, when I glimpsed them, were dark pools reflecting a profound sorrow or a chilling emptiness. They never looked me directly in the eye, never acknowledged my presence beyond a fleeting, almost imperceptible nod. I felt utterly alone, a stranger in a strange land, unwelcome in my own skin. Sister Margaret, my assigned mentor, was a woman carved from granite. Her steely gray hair escaped the confines of her veil in wispy strands, framing a face etched with the lines of years spent in quiet contemplation, or perhaps quiet suffering. Her piercing green eyes, however, were unnervingly sharp, seeming to pierce through the flimsy facade I desperately tried to maintain. My first real encounter with her took place in the lavatorium, a cold, damp room where we were to bathe together in preparation for evening prayers. "You'll need to get used to it," she said, her voice a low monotone, as she scrubbed my back with a rough cloth. The water, barely lukewarm, did little to soothe the tremor in my hands. "No modesty here. We are all one in the eyes of the Lord." Her words felt hollow, devoid of any spiritual comfort. Her touch, though, was anything but hollow. Her hands, surprisingly strong for a woman of her age, were rough against my skin, her nails digging in, a subtle assertion of dominance that sent a shiver down my spine. There was a strength in her, a steeliness that both frightened and strangely fascinated me. I didn't know what to expect from this life, from this place, but I was about to find out, and it wouldn't be the quiet piety I'd envisioned. That night, I lay in my cold, hard cot, the silence of the convent pressing down on me like a physical weight. The only sound was the relentless drip, drip, drip of water from somewhere deep within the ancient structure. I had just begun to drift off, the exhaustion finally claiming me, when a hand, cold and surprisingly firm, rested on my breast. I jolted awake, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sister Margaret stood over me, her habit discarded, revealing a body shockingly pale and naked in the moonlight. "Shh," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "The others are sleeping. It's just you and me, alone with God." The words, spoken with unsettling serenity, were a prelude to a violation I couldn't comprehend, a transgression that shattered the fragile world I had constructed. She climbed into the bed, her body cold and firm against mine. This was wrong, horribly, fundamentally wrong. Yet I was paralyzed not just by fear, but by something else, something unsettling and forbidden, desire. Her hands roamed my body, exploring, groping, violating, and yet, a strange heat bloomed within me. I tried to squirm away, but her grip was like iron. Her teeth sank into my neck, drawing a sharp cry from my lips. "Be quiet," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. You don't want to wake the others. Then her head was between my legs, her tongue a searing brand that ignited a fire within me, a fire that spread through my body, consuming me in a wave of pleasure so intense it defied my understanding of sin and virtue. I moaned, my hips arching, my body betraying all my carefully constructed beliefs. This was sin, pure and unadulterated sin, yet it was good. Too good. She worked me over like a woman possessed, her rhythm relentless. My climax was a shattering release, a raw, animalistic cry echoing off the stone walls. When she finished, she crawled up my body and kissed me, her mouth slick with my fluids, her taste a strange and intoxicating blend of sin and forbidden pleasure. I wanted to push her away, but I found myself clinging to her, desperate for the continuation of a transgression that had irrevocably altered my reality. Over the next few weeks, Sister Margaret's visits became a ritual, a dark sacrament practiced under the cover of night. She taught me things I never dreamed existed, things that defied the piety of the convent, things that turned my understanding of faith and devotion on its head. She taught me how to pleasure her, how to bring her to the edge, how to make her scream. We became entwined, a dark dance of desire performed in the shadows of the sanctuary. But Margaret wasn't alone. There were others, sisters cloaked in piety, but seething with an unspoken, ravenous lust. I was passed from one to another, a shared vessel of desire, my body a canvas for their sinful expressions. Sister Rachel took me from behind, Sister Tessa expertly rubbed my clitoris to the brink, while Sister Catherine choked me, her strap-on a blunt instrument of their depravity. I was their plaything, their toy, their shared secret. God, I knew, watched. He saw every transgression, every stolen moment, every whispered moan. Yet I couldn't stop, the pleasure too overwhelming, too consuming. They had corrupted me, twisted me, molded me into their image, into a creature as monstrous as themselves. In the end, I became one of them. A blackout nun, as we whispered amongst ourselves, a scourge on the house of God. We brought our sin to the sanctuary, defiling the altars and pews, our bodies a testament to our depravity. The convent was but a facade, a mask concealing our shared darkness. And I reveled in it, my soul damned for all eternity, my fate sealed in the embrace of forbidden desires. Now, the autumn leaves crunch beneath my feet as I walk to the chapel. I say my prayers, but they ring hollow, empty words against the backdrop of my transgressions. I am beyond salvation, and I know it. I am the sinful nun, the slut of God, and in the darkness of my depravity, I find a perverse kind of peace. I wouldn't have it any other way. I still remember the night it all started, the night I should have walked away, but didn't. I had just moved into this quiet, rented house with my wife Sarah. The place was decent, but it felt empty. Sarah worked long shifts at the hospital, and I worked from home. Most nights, I was alone. And that emptiness, that silence, it weighed on me. Our marriage had started to slip into routine, and I found myself craving something more, something real. Then there was Mara. She was our neighbor, simple enough, always polite, always friendly. I'd see her now and then, stop for a chat when she'd bring over some wine or leftovers. She was always a little distant, a little enigmatic. There was something about her, though, an intensity in her eyes that I couldn't quite shake off. One night, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when my cell rang. It was Mara. Her voice on the other end was strained, almost breaking. She said something was wrong, that she was scared and didn't know what to do. I don't know why, but I didn't hesitate. I agreed to come over immediately. I shouldn't have gone. I should have just hung up and gone to bed, but something inside me, something I didn't even understand, pushed me to drive across the street to her house. When I got there, the door was cracked open. The faintest sliver of light spilled out, casting long shadows across the porch. My heart started racing. I knocked, but no one answered. The door just swayed slightly on its hinges, like it was inviting me in. "Mara?" I called softly. Still no response. I stepped inside. Her house was dimly lit, too quiet. A bottle of wine had spilled on the floor, papers were scattered everywhere. It felt wrong, something was off. But I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The air was thick, almost suffocating. I could feel the tension hanging in the room, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. "Mara?" I called again, my voice trembling slightly. I moved deeper into the house, instinctively drawn toward the hallway. The bathroom door was ajar, steam seeping out from under it. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I had to go in. When I pushed open the door, my breath caught in my throat. There she was, sitting in the bathtub, her body submerged in water. But it wasn't clear. No, the water was a deep, unsettling shade of red. Mara's eyes met mine immediately. There was no hesitation. No shame. Just that intense, cold gaze. "Ethan," she said, her voice like honey, but with something darker beneath it. I didn't know what to do. I should have turned and left. But I couldn't. "You're scared," I said, almost to myself, but she heard it. She smiled, but it wasn't the smile I'd seen 100 times before. No, this one was different. It was slow, deliberate, like she was enjoying something. Her lips parted, and her voice dripped with something else now, something that sent a chill through me. "You're lonely, aren't you? You've been craving something more?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. She reached out, grabbing my wrist with a strength that was startling. Her touch was ice cold, but it burned through me, sending a jolt of electricity straight to my core. She pulled me closer, her eyes never leaving mine. And I let her. My mind screamed for me to stop. To walk away. To leave. But my body, my desires, they betrayed me. I leaned in, the distance between us closing with a speed I couldn't control. Her lips met mine in a kiss that was hot, hungry, and desperate. It felt wrong, but in the most compelling way. Like a dark need that I couldn't deny. Her hands were all over me, pulling at my clothes, making it hard to breathe, to think. I was lost in her touch. My body was moving on its own, following the pull of her desire, her will. She made me feel wanted in a way I hadn't in years. She knew exactly what to say, exactly how to touch me. It was intoxicating, the way she controlled the moment, the way she made me forget everything. But as the kiss deepened, a nagging thought kept clawing at the back of my mind. What the hell am I doing? Was this really her? Or was something else in control? Her eyes had that same unsettling intensity one had seen before, like she wasn't quite human. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the heat between us. My hands moved of their own accord, exploring her body, the slickness of her skin under the water. She pulled me in closer, if that was even possible, as if she was drawing me into some kind of trap, one that I couldn't escape. Her fingers traced my chest, my arms, as if she was marking me, claiming me. The moment felt like it could go on forever, like nothing else in the world mattered. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about desire. There was something darker here, something primal. I pulled back, my breath ragged, my heart pounding in my chest. Mara didn't move. She didn't need to. She knew what had just happened. "You've always known," she whispered, her voice laced with satisfaction. "You've always wanted this." I couldn't respond. My head was spinning, my body still trembling from the rawness of the moment. I turned, not looking back, my mind a storm of confusion and guilt. I don't even know how I got back to my house, but somehow I did. Sarah was still at the hospital, and I lay in bed, the darkness of the room pressing down on me. I never told Sarah about that night. How could I? But I never forgot it either. The way Mara had made me feel, the way her touch had burned into me. The desire, the terror, the feeling of being something else, something not quite myself. Every time I saw Mara after that, it was like nothing had happened. She smiled, waved, even invited me over for coffee once. But in my mind, I could still feel her hand on my wrist, still hear her voice in my ear, still see the smile that didn't reach her eyes. I don't know what Mara wanted from me that night, or if she even wanted anything at all. But I do know one thing, I'll never be the same. I'd never been one to make hasty decisions, but that night, I realized I was done. Completely done. I had always loved her, in some twisted, obsessive way. But now, as I stood at the edge of the apartment, staring at her, I understood. I think I need to break up with my girlfriend. Her name was Rachel, but to me, she was always just her, a presence, a shadow, something that lingered, something that both comforted and terrified me. We'd been together for 2 years, but over the past 6 months, things had changed. And not in a good way. It started with little things, small moments that were easy to dismiss, like her sudden silences, or the way she'd stare at me when I wasn't looking. At first, I figured it was just stress. Life was complicated, we both had jobs, things weren't perfect, but we made it work. I should have trusted my instincts, but I didn't. I couldn't. Then the whispers started. Not from her. No, Rachel was always calm, collected, too controlled for something so overt. The whispers were in the walls, or so I convinced myself. It felt like they were always there, just beyond the threshold of my hearing, when I was alone, when I thought I could catch a break. I'd lie in bed, eyes wide open, staring into the dark, listening for them. The way they made me feel like I wasn't alone in my own damn house. That's when the dreams began. They were more like vivid memories, dreams of things we'd never done together, twisted versions of our past. Sometimes, I'd wake up with the taste of her lips on mine, but it wasn't Rachel. It was someone else, someone darker, more dangerous. And then one night, the truth became undeniable. I came home late from work, tired, frustrated, with no idea that everything was about to unravel. Rachel was waiting for me, but there was something off about her. She was sitting on the couch, the dim light from the hallway casting shadows across her face. She looked pale, almost sickly, her eyes too wide, too intense. She didn't greet me with a smile like she always did. Instead, she just stared. No words, no movement. I tried to act normal, hanging up my coat and kicking off my shoes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "You look tired," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," I replied uneasily. "Just a long day." But I couldn't ignore the tightness in my chest, the way my heart seemed to pound harder every second. It was like I was suffocating. The walls felt smaller. The air was thick with something I couldn't place. She didn't get up, didn't move a muscle. But I felt her presence, like she was too close, even though we were miles apart. I sat down across from her, trying to make conversation, trying to act like everything was fine. But as I spoke, I saw it. Her hand, trembling, barely noticeable, but shaking all the same, moved towards her neck, and then she started to trace something there. A symbol, almost drawn in the air with her fingers. Her lips parted ever so slightly, but no words came out. And then the whispers began. Louder this time. So loud I couldn't tell if they were in my head or if they were coming from her. I felt my skin prickle, the hairs on my neck standing on end as the voices whispered my name, soft, seductive, threatening. Rachel's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw it, something else, something other staring back at me. Something cold, something monstrous. It wasn't her. I backed away, heart racing. I had to get out of there. I stood, stumbled over the coffee table, and ran for the door. But she was faster. Before I could reach the handle, she was there. Her hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a strength that was unnatural, her fingers digging into my skin, almost to the bone. Her grip was suffocating. "You're not going anywhere," she whispered, her voice like velvet, but there was nothing warm about it. It was a command. I tried to pull away, but it was like she was made of iron. Her gaze was unblinking, her lips curling into a smile that made my stomach turn. "Rachel, let go of me!" I gasped, panicking, desperate. But she didn't respond. Instead, she leaned in, her breath hot against my ear. "You think you can just leave me? You think you can just break up with me?" Her words were slow, deliberate, like she was savoring every syllable. I felt something in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't fear anymore. It was terror. She wasn't the person I thought I knew. She was something worse. Something darker. Something alive in a way I couldn't understand. I struggled, but the harder I tried to break free, the tighter her grip became. And then, just as I thought I was going to suffocate, I felt it. Her lips, warm and moist, brushing against my neck. Her kiss was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't passionate or loving. It was invasive. It was hungry. It felt like something was feeding on me, on my very soul. And that's when I knew. I had made a mistake. A fatal mistake. I had let her in, and now, I couldn't escape. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about love, about Rachel, fell apart. Her grip loosened, and I stumbled back, gasping for air. My chest burned, my heart racing, but I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. The room spun, and I thought I might pass out. But before I could even get my bearings, she whispered in a voice that chilled me to my core. I own you now. And I realized then that breaking up with her wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't save me. Because whatever she was never going to let me go.